I'm glad. I'm glad that people are really interested in typefaces and typography. I mean, usually, I don't know what you think, Bethany, but people are more interested. It seems like I get a lot of questions on hand lettering and lettering in general, and they say it's hand typography. I don't know. What are your thoughts on that, on the trend of lettering?
I mean, I admire people who can do it. I have never. I guess it's either my aesthetic or being comfortable within my own limitations. But usually I can find a typeface that'll give me what I want. And there's been a few times where I've gone in and tried to edit letter forms and do small adjustments to get things to look exactly the way that I want them if I'm doing a word mark or something. But so I guess I think it's interesting, but it's not. I like when I think of typography, I think more of how do people use like a set of type, like I see the typeface as the like set of restrictions or like the tool, and how do you use it? And lettering, calligraphy is more of like a fine art in some ways, at least in the terms of setting it. And I don't have that capability, so it's not something I consider a whole lot.
Right.
That's a weird answer to that question, I guess, but that's my perception of it.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of confusion between the two. Guys, we just jumped on a little bit early. If you can use the share button underneath our video and let everyone know that we are getting started. There's actually quite a few people here. Hey, everyone. Hi, Nancy and Dave and Darren, and hi, Victoria. And Jason is going to join us later from Cupertino. Hi, Erica. It's good to see you guys. So we were wondering where you're calling in from, and also let us know how many typefaces you usually use when you approach your design. We put a poll up, and it looks like so far most people use about 3. Well, that's the most. 4 takes a lot of work, but we'd love to know. Let's see. Shane says usually 2 or 3 max. Nancy is from Vancouver. Nancy, we had met at a TypeCon a while before, huh? Let's see, Matt is Australian designer in Los Angeles. Jason, I'm glad that you're joining us from Cupertino. Sorry you have to go. And Elena's from New York City. So we've got a couple people in here. Yep, TypeCon Seattle, that was fun. Have you ever been to a TypeCon, Bethany?
I just the one that was in Seattle this past year. So I guess we're both there.
That's right. We were both there. And that's right. I forgot. Who pointed that out? It was John Downer, right? He mentioned,
Yep.
Oh, yeah, that's right. And Kendra's from Phoenix, and Darren's from Toronto. Excellent. Let's see. Leslie said that she just picked 6, but I kind of cheated. She's from San Bernardino, and Diego's back here from Mexico. Thank you guys for joining us. So we're going to get started. Again, if you use your share button, let everyone know that we are going to get started here with Bethany Heck. She's a design director at Vox Media. You want to tell us a little bit, Bethany, about what you do at Vox Media?
Sure. I am overseeing a section of the product design that Vox does. So unlike a lot of companies, Vox builds most of the software that they use internally. So the things that they use to look at data analytics or to build out their articles, like their version of, like, say, the Medium composition screen, they build all that in-house. They build their CMS to schedule and publish and manage posts, video management. So there's all these different areas where they touch and make software. And I came in late last year to try to make those things feel more unified and improve the UX on some of the areas that have been a little bit more neglected, and just help them figure out, where we want to push forward next. So the editorial staff has the best tools possible to do their jobs.
And before that, you were at Microsoft, were you not?
Yes. I was the creative lead on Power BI, which is a business intelligence dashboarding data visualization tool.
Very cool. We have a couple more people. Cordelia from North Carolina. Hello, guys. Josie from Dallas, Texas. And yay, Rosie from Seattle. Love the people from Seattle. Well, very cool. We're going to get started here. Welcome again to Typography Dojo. I'm Rachel Elnar, your host here in Los Angeles from TypeEd. And today, all the way, we have from Texas, Austin, Texas, correct? Bethany, where are you? In Austin?
Seattle.
In Seattle. Oh, why
Yep.
am I thinking Austin, Texas?
I was in Austin before Seattle, so I've bounced around a lot. I can't blame you. If you named a city, I could probably say that I lived there.
Got it. Okay. All over the place, right?
Yes. Yes.
So you are in Seattle. Okay, so Bethany's in Seattle, and welcome everyone. And James Matson from the Valley, very cool. And Winston, I know here in Orange County, very cool. So we can get started if you'd like. Okay, so what I'll do is I'll open up your screen, Bethany. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. And Bethany will get started with her presentation. If you guys have any questions, please put them under the questions and answers tab underneath. Bethany, whenever you're ready.
Okay, great. Let's go. So wanted to talk today about multi-typeface systems. And before we can talk about that, I guess we need to talk about how I got started using a lot of typefaces in my design and how I kind of turned into somebody who uses a lot of typography in their work. So even before I started at the graphic design program at Auburn, I had a real interest in letterpress and old broadside typography. I collect wood type, some of which is sitting behind me. So I guess if some of you guys want to see it later on, we can do that. But I just loved looking at these old broadsides that were just wall-to-wall text. They used language, they used all typefaces, and then, you know, as you study it and you learn more about the practice of it, you learn that one of the reasons why they used all these different typefaces was a technological control. Or, you know, if you needed to fit more letters on a line, you use a more condensed typeface. You sort of had to use what was lying around, and people had to get really creative. And there's just all this interesting background and history to this sort of typography that I found really interesting. But when I started at Auburn, all the projects made you use a single typeface, so I found other ways to make my projects obnoxious and maximalist. This was like, this folds into a cube, and we had to use one typeface, and it had to, I can't remember exactly what, it had to answer a question. So started with things like this, and eventually we got to do things like lay out a book. So this is a spread in a book. We got to use two typefaces, which felt amazing. They let us pick one of two stodgy old typefaces to use. Accidents Grotesque and Garamond, I think. So we're in this book. It's about Dadaism. Again, you're noticing a trend of lots of words, lots of stuff. So that was what was interesting to me. And then moving on in the program, they start to give you a little bit more freedom. They remove the typeface restrictions, and it's basically whatever you can get your hands on, you can use. So I did this riff on the superhero supply store in Brooklyn, which is a nonprofit to do the Sidekick supply company. And I think this is the first project I did that used like just a crazy number of typefaces, and it wasn't necessarily that I was going out to do that. I just had all these things and would think like, okay, that looks all right, but I use that somewhere else. What if I tried something else? So this is sort of me trying to feel stuff out. And that kind of mindset accumulated when I started working on the Eephus League, which we'll talk about more in depth later. But that was my senior project at Auburn. It was the last thing I did in school. And again, using a lot of faces. And I didn't limit that to only print work. When I started making websites, this is a website about my wood type collection. I used Cipher and any number of annoying, awful web technologies to get as many typefaces into this web design as I could. And then, you know, started chilling out and refining that a little bit when I started moving into my professional career. This work for Historic Columbia is using, I think that site uses 3 typefaces. So just continuing to mix and match some work that I did for IBM. There's all sorts of typefaces here. Even at Microsoft and Power BI, we used multiple typefaces. We'll get more into this later. And then little side projects that I do. I made this Latigre branding as a fun thing for our Power BI team because there was a Tiger Squad joke that one of the team members was from Brazil. It became Latigre. It became a thing. Just another of work that I've done with multiple typefaces and pulling in all these historic examples. And then this was a giant poster filled with in jokes from our work. Sorry for the language. There's probably going to be more swearing.
It's beautiful, Bethany. It's really beautiful.
Thank you. So sometimes I like to give myself challenges about like this one is just like, I've got a lot of black letter typefaces. Let's have some fun. So it's sort of just organically become a trend in my work. As somebody who is not an image maker, I can't illustrate. I'm not a very good photographer. But the way that I like to communicate in my design is with words. I like to sort of amplify that with interesting combinations of typefaces. And I never really felt like what I was doing was all that strange until I relaunched my website in 2013, I think it was. It uses 4 typefaces, which I think is very modest. But it was featured on typewolf.com, and Jeremiah was nice enough to feature it, and he wrote a little bit about it. And he said, I love this site because it's not afraid to break one of the first rules of setting type. Don't use too many different fonts. And he talks about the typefaces that he thinks that it's still effective, but that made me kind of stop and think, well, don't use too many typefaces. I'm not sure that I ever had that lesson in school, but it's something that I've heard sort of offhand frequently, and it got me thinking about, why do I use so many typefaces? Is that a good thing? Am I doing it for a good reason? Is there something that's unique or valuable about the way that I'm doing things as opposed to the way other people look at it? So that's sort of how this talk came into existence. So why do we have rules about the number of typefaces we should use? Well, because people don't want us to make things that look like this. You'll see designs a lot of times that are clearly trying to compensate for a lack of a compelling message or some other fundamental design flaws by throwing more typefaces at it, which is like, bedazzling a bad pair of jeans. It's trying to compensate for these other flaws just by throwing display faces at it and hoping that you won't notice that it's not really saying anything. It's supposed to like make it exciting or make it interesting by using all these typefaces, which is obviously not a great way to go about doing your work. So that's why your professors and design leaders want you to just use one typeface. Sometimes it's Helvetica. I have to have a Helvetica joke because it's type talk. So here's a lot of Helvetica. But when you do limit your typefaces, you do force yourself to more consciously consider the images that you're using, what your verbiage is, your messaging, your overall composition. It forces you to focus on fundamentals a little bit more, which is great. But there are also examples of pieces like this, and I'm not showing this to pick on it, but this poster's using 2 typefaces. It's using it's look like a Bethany and Helvetica, and so it's following that rule, and it's also got a grid going on, so it's following 2 rules. But there's little things that you could point out about this that are hurting it a little bit. There's a difference in tracking between the 2 headlines. The top headline that's in a gold color it feels like it should be smaller or larger compared to the large 4 set of words below it. So I just include this to show an example of something that is following this limited typeface rule. It's using a grid, it's checking off all these boxes, but it's not a perfect execution of a design. So that's why I have sort of a problem with this idea of telling people that they should limit the number of typefaces that they use, because it doesn't in any case prevent you from making a really bad piece of design. So I think we need to chill out a little bit with the typographic conservatism. I think that designs with multiple typefaces can be just as focused, just as clearly communicated and controlled as designs with a single typeface. And I don't think that people should knock designs that use multiple typefaces just because they're breaking this rule that does seem to prevent a lot of bad work from the first place. I see a lot of comments like this. Realistically, there's no reason to use more than 3 fonts in any piece of design, not just the web. That's it, no more, sorry. So this first off, I'll point out that this person doesn't care so much about the prime apostrophe situation as much as he cares about the typeface situation, because those primes are really driving me crazy. But when I see stuff like this, I feel like it's more designers who are pushing their idea of what a good or clean or professional aesthetic is, instead of somebody who's coming from a place of trying to argue for something that's better for the audience. And that's probably at the root of what bothers me the most about this sort of this perception that you need to limit the number of typefaces that you use, is because usually it's, well, I think it's tacky to use more than one, or why can't you do the same thing with fewer? Well, if you can't make the argument that me using multiple typefaces is actually making it harder for somebody to understand or appreciate the design, the language, what the piece of software or the book or the poster or whatever it is trying to communicate, then have an argument to tell me how many typefaces I should be using, is my perception. You can actually use multiple typefaces to build out experiences for users that help them understand and perceive differences in information. So like if this one typeface, you know, it's all clean and homogeneous and it has a certain look. But if you start adding additional typefaces, you can start to build up those little layers of differentiation between the types of content and make the experience feel a little bit more rich and personalized to that type of brand. And it also helps the user sort of distinguish the different types of information that they're looking at, which there's a whole section on that later on in the talk. But it's not just window dressing, and it's not just, you know, me doing it because I think it looks good. There's actually a lot of good justifications for doing it. So we're gonna get into some of the tips and tricks on how you can better pair typefaces, find good excuses to use more typefaces in your design. And obviously, I would be remiss if I acted like I was the only person who was doing this. There are lots of great designers who use multiple typefaces in really beautiful ways, particularly in print and branding design. So I just wanted to throw out some kudos to some designers and some designs here, but we'll dive right into the talk. So if we're going to use multiple typefaces and build out an eclectic type system, you should probably start with a good pairing of typefaces. If you're going to use more than one, you have to start with two. So I love this branding work that Jessica Svensson and Julia Novich did for their year-end exhibition. And it's using Bureau Grotesque and Letter Gothic, which at first glance might not seem like they make a whole lot of sense together. Letter Gothic is monospaced, it's very thin and skinny, and they're using a very heavy condensed weight of Bureau Grotesque as well. But if we look a little bit closer at some of the individual letter forms and how they're being used in the design, we can start to see why it feels pretty nice in the design. So if you look at certain letter forms like that lowercase a and the lowercase r, and Letter Gothic, lowercase a, and Bureau Grotesque, you see that they sort of have that same lazy hang to them, sort of like an arm hanging off the side of a bed on a Saturday morning. That's my favorite posture. So even though they're stylistically quite different, design is using those letter forms in the most common, like lock up, which is this, and you start to subconsciously see those connections between the letter forms, even though from a formal standpoint the typefaces don't have a ton in common. So we've got this nice combination here where we've got, you know, some similarity in the letter forms between Letter Gothic and we've got Bureau Grotesque. So if we wanted to build out a system around this, where would we start? Well, I would probably start with adding kind of a serif. You could say serifa. It's a geometric slab serif, so it is. It's going to be a nice straight man. It's inoffensive. Nobody ever got fired for using serifa, and so it's going to the sort of very geometric, low contrast nature of it won't conflict or clash with anything that's going on in Bureau Grotesque or Letter Gothic. And it also gives you a serif to play with if you kind of need that extra definition in letter forms. And you could also play with adding something like Sweet Sans. This is a cheat that I always do, is I always pick something like Sweet Sans that looks really great in all caps and really far tracked out, and I throw it in little places for tertiary bits of information in my design, because I like that tiny type, sort of very techy, really scientific feel in my pieces like information overload. But there's multiple reasons that beyond like my personal preference for this typeface. The reason why you would use it, you would want to keep it in all caps, is that the capital letters in Sweet Sans have, even though it's an extended wide set sort of engraver's typeface, the uppercases have more of a connection to the geometric letter forms in Serifa, and the tracking relates it a little bit to the monospacing in letter Gothic. So it's smart to know exactly how each of your typefaces relates to the other typefaces, so you can play off of those relationships. So this is just a quick mock-up of what all these typefaces could look like if they're all together. So we've got letter Gothic real big on the left, Bureau Grotesque on the right is the headline. So we're nailing that close relationship those two typefaces have right off the bat. We're using Serifa and Sweet Sans in very small controlled ways on the side, just as extra information, and everything feels all right. But I can make a really bad example with these same typefaces. It's a good example of why you should always follow the rules, because if I do something even as simple as setting Bureau Grotesque in all caps, that relationship to letter Gothic doesn't, now all of a sudden those two typefaces don't really feel like they connect as much with each other. We've got Serifa, randomly in all caps. Sweet Sans is in lowers in that dark block. So it feels like, why are you using Sweet Sans when you have Bureau Grotesque? So everything's a mess. And all we had to do was change 2 or 3 typefaces in the way that they're used. So it's also not as simple as saying, these are good typeface combinations, because I've just shown you that you can make a system of type that works decently together, and then you can change 2 things and completely have it fall apart. So if you're going to use multiple typefaces, it's very important that you consider very carefully which ones that you why you use them, and you stick to the rules that you set. It's not.
I'm sorry, we have a request from Darren. If you can move the cursor over to the side of the screen. There you go. Yeah. Thank you. That's okay.
Always forget about that sneaky cursor.
All good. Thanks, Darren.
Yes, thank you for catching that. So one of the other rules that I see about typography is that you shouldn't use 2 typefaces in the same design that look too similar. You should strive for contrast in your typefaces. So this is an article that I saw on Typekit's website that talks about combining typefaces, and it says don't combine typefaces that are too close, like Helvetica and Universe. I'm going to call it Universe and not the right way, not the fancy way, because I'm from Alabama, and y'all are just going to have to deal with it and accept that I'm a redneck. So the argument is that Helvetica and Universe are both sans serifs in a similar family, and so if you use them in the same design, somebody might pick up the fact that, here the cursor's coming back because I need it, that lowercase a in Helvetica and the lowercase a in Universe are similar but not quite the same, and that might make them feel like there's a mistake. So let's look at Universe and Helvetica together and see where they're similar and where they're different, and if we can come up with some unique characteristics about each of them that would justify using them in the same design. So we've got Helvetica on the top and Universe on the bottom, and Helvetica is, a good cut of Helvetica is probably most defined by the very tight letter spacing between the letter forms, very clean cut. And while Universe might seem like a fairly simple sans serif compared to some typefaces, it actually has little bits of character in it, like the way that the tail on the Y curls up, as compared to something like Universe below, where the typeface, the individual letter forms are slightly narrower, but the space between those letter forms is much wider. It's really evident, it's really obvious between the B and the R set here. So even though the letters are slightly more condensed, it takes up more space on the line because of that extra letter spacing between the characters. So knowing both of these things, that we've got Helvetica, which looks really great when everything's sort of really tight together, and it's a little bit more expressive, and we've got Universe, which has simpler letter forms that are tighter, but also more space between the letter forms. Is there, in theory, a design that could take advantage of those things at the same time and justify using both in the same piece? So there's not a lot of examples of those two typefaces being used together, but I was able to find one. So this is a really old piece from a, I think it's from a play program, and it's got Helvetica as the headline, and you can see it's using a nice heavy weight of Helvetica. The letter forms are so close, they're almost touching. It's very tight, and really just shows off the beautiful characteristics of that typeface. And the type underneath it is all set in universe, and you can see how airy it all is. And so if you're limited in terms of, you can only choose between these two typefaces, they made the right call in using universe here, because if the text below was set in Helvetica and it was set that tightly, it's going to start feeling like, a typographic orgy where everything's bumping up against each other. And because they use these two typefaces in this way, you have some different, you've got a situation where the written copy is easier to read, it's got more air, it doesn't feel too claustrophobic, while you're still taking advantage of Helvetica's Helvetica-ness in the header. So that's an example. I'm going to show you a more fun example of something that I've done myself, because this is a presentation. When I was at IBM, I did the branding work for the Mobile Innovation Lab. And this is a direction that we looked at early on. And so I made these sort of brand badgy things as the starting point using Interstate, because I really love the way that it is in all caps. It feels clinical in a way that's interesting, also like imperfect and it's got a zillion different weights, which makes it really good for this sort of like work. So I'd had these branding pieces, and I wanted to build out a brand book celebrating the team. So I needed a body text, and I also wanted to have a headline sans serif text for the book. So I picked Tempest Tech for the serif to use inside of the book, and I chose a serif because I knew that I was using a lot of serifs, and I wanted to warm it up a little bit. And Tempest is a very sturdy typeface. It's relatively low contrast. Its little serifs, are kind of beefy without being distracting. So it holds up like next to all these sans serif typefaces. I'm not a person who likes to pair very high contrast serifs with heavier sans serifs very often. So Tempo's a great pick for that. So I needed to pick my sans serif headline. And so I was looking at two other Clim typefaces, which were Founders Grotesque and Colibri. And they're both from the same type foundry, so they have a lot of similarities, but they're different in some important ways too. So I overlaid them in the middle and see that they both have the same X height. They're a little bit offset in this PDF because Keynote, this started in Keynote, and Keynote's not good about getting pixel perfect alignment on things, but they have the same X height. But the X height feels lower in Founders because it's ever so slightly taller, and the cap height is ever so slightly taller on Founders. So it gives the illusion that the lowercase letter forms are smaller or shorter on Founders Grotesque. So that already jumps out at me as a red flag of this probably isn't going to be great at smaller sizes if I need it for that. And Founders is like a grotesque typeface, so it's got a lot of character to it, some thick and thin contrasts, kind of old school like sans serif qualities. Colibri is an interesting typeface because it's sort of a mixture of a grotesque metric typeface. So it's got fewer flourishes on it. The X height is really healthy compared to the cap height, but it's still got a little bit of personality to it too. You can see it in that weird kind of sideways bulb on the lowercase. It's a really pretty typeface as well. So I started working on this cover, which is a little Swiss-ish, and it's got my badges on it too. And I tried Founders first, and it works fine, but it started to feel almost too Swiss and too clinical. And I didn't think Founders was really jiving with the geometric shapes in the badges that I had made because of the sort of wide variety of forms. So when I tried Colibri, I was much happier with it because it's got, you know, the letter forms are more geometric, which relates to the geometric shapes in the badges. It's got some grotesque qualities, so it doesn't feel totally out of place in this sort of layout. And it started to feel like, okay, this is a unique aesthetic for this brand, instead of with the Founders, which sort of felt like I'm trying to do a Swiss thing and stick all this other stuff on it. It started to feel like a more cohesive, like total look and feel. So most people would make that decision and say, okay, good, that's my sort of headline typeface, we're good to go. So when I got to the inside of the book and setting these heading sections, I tried Colibri as the heading, and it works fine. It's a beautiful typeface. I love this typeface. But I was curious. There was just some things about it that didn't feel like it was really singing or pulling the way that I wanted it to pull. I really wanted those headlines to look beautiful. So I tried it in Founders, and I was like, oh my gosh, look at how great that looks. Look at the G, look at the A. And also by bringing Founders back in here, it makes that intro paragraph underneath it feel so nice and tidy because it's there's a different type of typeface above it. So it really emphasizes how nice Colibri is looking in that sort of introductory, like tight paragraph, and how just solid that the visual gray on that feels. So long story short, I used 4 typefaces in this design. 3 of them were sans serifs, and the world didn't end. This is an example of a spread that's using all of the typefaces. There's Interstate, Tempest, Founders, and Colibri. And because I'm very aware of what each typeface is and why I'm using it, it's okay that I'm using them all in the same design, because they each have a role to play. And I don't feel the need to roll them all out on all the pages if they're not needed. Go away. Forever will remind me tomorrow. So these are other examples of spreads that are typefaces, just to show you some more about what that brand ended up feeling like. There are additional materials that are also using all these typefaces, like notebooks and RSV cards for meetings and clothing tags. So all that is to say is that you shouldn't be too afraid to use typefaces that might be of the same classification or even like subgenre, like geometric, sans serif typefaces, so long as there are characteristics that you can find in them that are unique, and then you can use them in a way that emphasize their uniqueness. They will feel different, and people will understand why you're using both of them. So this is one of my favorite topics to talk about when I'm talking about typefaces, is using them as UX aids. So one big problem that we have as designers is that usually when we get content, it looks like this. We get a heading. If we're lucky, we get subheadings, and we get bodies of copy. And so they give us this, and they're like, you need to make it look great. And you're like, I want to die because this is really boring. And so a lot of people just, pick a typeface for each of these different levels of hierarchy, and they call it a day and they give up. But one of the great things that multiple typefaces can do for you is enable you to differentiate the different types of content that your audience is looking at, and understand that they're different and process them in different ways. And frankly, it's our jobs as designers that when we get this wall of text, this awful wall of text from our client, that we need to push ourselves to actually look at what this content is saying and find new ways of breaking it up and presenting it to people in ways that will understand. Visual design goes beyond how the content looks. It's about how to make the content communicate most effectively to your audience. So you might be in a situation where you need to do a bio page, and you're given, a full name, a title, and a biography, and you're like, well, shoot, I want to make this interesting. But if you really think about it, you can find ways to pull out more levels of information in your work. So this is another example of the HiveWorks stuff. And there are 8 different levels of information on the spread, because you just gotta, I would encourage designers to contribute ideas to how the content is being presented beyond just saying, here's how I think what you gave me should look. You should understand the problem. Like if it's a body of text, what is the text about? What is this trying to teach somebody? What point is it trying to make? And try to break out and divide things in that way, and establishing all these levels of information hierarchy. And then when you do that, you have an excuse to start using more typographic styles. And it's not just adding visual noise, it's visually distinguishing each of those sections of information in ways that make them easier for your user to understand. Magazine design does this all the time. I can assure you that the people who do spreads like this are given the same box of text that everybody else is, or they're told, hey, make an infographic. And you have to understand what you're looking at and reformat it and present it in a way that helps people actually understand what they're looking at. So an article like this, you see all these pull quotes, and they have different styles and they have different meanings and pullouts. And again, I promise you that this person this designer was given probably the same awful giant wall of text that anybody else is, but they took the time to understand what the article was about, and they framed imagery, and then also used sections of text and styled those texts in a consistent way that allows the user to sort of scan. It's an extra layer of understanding for the reader. So the reader can scan this, and maybe they don't feel like reading the whole text, but they can read those pull-out blocks and get the gist of some of the highlights, and maybe that draws them in to actually read the rest of the copy. Because I think as a designer, sometimes you have to assume that nobody wants to actually read or do anything, and you have to like throw out a bone and offer a carrot to get somebody to actually read the meat of the text. And IBM has always had exceptional editorial design, and I think that they're great at that. My favorite example of doing this, of using different typefaces to differentiate different levels of information hierarchy, is Typography for Lawyers by Matthew Butterick. Matthew is, I think, a type designer and a designer, and he's also a lawyer, apparently.
It's the other way around, actually. He's a lawyer, and he's also a type designer.
I guess if you're a lawyer, you're a lawyer first. But he is a multi-talented person. And he wrote this amazing book about with guidance on how you should style and write up your legal documents. And he uses, it's over half a dozen typefaces in this design. And the way that he uses them is for each of these different types of content that he has. So for his captions, for these side columns, for these call outs where he's calling out certain types of punctuation that you should use. For his tables, he's using different typefaces to visually distinguish those things. So as you understand the type of information that you're looking at, so you know that you're looking at an example, you know that you're looking at, a sort of footnote type situation versus other types of call outs that he's using. And so he's not doing this isn't just him showing off. He's using the typefaces as a way of distinguishing the different types of content and the different purposes that each of these pieces of information have. It's no different than when you're designing UI. You have to make the different types of pieces of your user interface look visually unique, so that the user understands what they're looking at and they understand what it does. It's not just about legibility and being able to read the thing, it's about understanding what it does. And we're fine with talking about distinguishing these things by drawing boxes around them or putting shadows on them or by changing the color. But for some reason, we have this huge blocker when it's to using multiple typefaces to distinguish these things. And it's really no different. It's a way of communicating a message where you can see that the thing is different and understand that it has a unique meaning. And I think it's a shame that we've sort of taught ourselves that we shouldn't use typefaces in that way. And so I got to put that to the test when I was working at Microsoft. So a few years ago, Microsoft paid Monotype a lot of money for an awful typeface called Segoe, and they decided that they should use it for everything.
Funny.
So use it for marketing materials, and they use it for UI, which is really a shame, because even if you like Segoe as a typeface, I think that it has some rendering problems on a lot of Windows monitors, particularly at small sizes, just because of the nature of the way that it's drawn. But the problem with that, beyond my thinking that it's a poopy typeface, is that Microsoft makes a lot of very text-intensive UIs. So as you can see here, there are a lot of words. And particularly if you're not using a lot of color, it's really difficult to sort of tell which of these is a button that I can interact with, which of these is just a label. There's a lot going on. There's a lot of information density in a lot of their stuff. And in a lot of cases, they're not even using color to differentiate, but when they do, they use something like this green, which almost looks like it's black anyway. I mean, picking on Excel, because Excel's Excel, and it's the most complicated. So sometimes, some people at the company would say, oh, well, we're using this green, and that's what's determining what is and isn't actionable. So it's okay that we're using the same typeface for everything, and that everything's flat, so we don't use shadows, don't look like buttons anymore. But the problem is that on a screen like this, there are things that are green that are not clickable. Mm-hmm. Format data labels doesn't do anything if you click on it. So you just end up with a lot of information and a lot of issues with communicating to people what's there as label text that's just informative to help people understand the user interface, and what's actually something that's going to do something if I click on it. So coming into Power BI, which is a data analytics app, it's very similar to Excel. It's very complicated, and we're using Go. And so I proposed that we added DIN, which Microsoft made their own cut of DIN, and it's just a very classic condensed sans serif typeface, no nonsense. And so we experimented with adding DIN in a few places. So we have a lot of menus like this where you need to sort of have a heading, which is the all caps visual options and color options. It doesn't do anything. It's just there to let you know what the information below it is and what it's doing. So we tried it in all caps. We can try fading colors, which helps. But the thing that made it the most clear that it was something different was just changing the typeface. And DIN is not a typeface that draws a lot of attention to itself. It's not like this is some obnoxious thing like, oh my God, like why have you used hobo inside this interface? It's just something that's slightly different, that when we use it consistently, we can teach people that when they see this typeface styled in this way, when you see all cap DIN, and you don't even need to know that it's DIN, you just need to know that it's a different typeface than the other typefaces, you will start to understand, okay, that's like my label informative typeface. That's just there to help me know what I'm looking at. So this is just another example. Try to go like in a slightly darker gray. It looks like another item option. You try it in all caps, but again, the thing that is the most clear is simply setting it at a different typeface. So this is what Power BI looked like when I joined. I know it's awful.
Wow.
We moved to this, and this is with everything with Segoe, and then this is going to be a really subtle change, but you can see things like data themes. When I change them to DIN, your brain starts to process the fact that your brain likes to make distinctions between things, and it starts to see like layers and levels and hierarchy in the typography, even when it's just as subtle as changing one typeface to another typeface. It lets your brain rest a little bit instead of being overwhelmed by like, oh my gosh, all these things, like, are these all options? Like, what am I looking at? When you start to teach somebody that the different typeface means that it's not actionable, it's just there to help you, you're going to start quickly sort of paying less attention to that and focusing on the things that actually get you to where you go. And this is just another example of one of the experiences that we worked on that used both typefaces. It still feels like Microsoft and and just to go back to typography for lawyers, I know that in type school we were told a lot about the crystal goblet and this idea that your typography should never get in the way. It should be like a crystal goblet that allows you to see the liquid inside of it. So your typography should not get in the way of the message. But I think that you can still crystal goblet your typography while using multiple typefaces, so long as you're doing it in service of helping your audience understand what they're looking at. So I don't see any of this as noise. I see the different typefaces as being levels of distinction between the value and the purpose and the functionality of the type of information that I'm looking at. So if I'm finding these footnotes that are assigned to not be as interesting, it's easier for me to ignore them because they're visually distinct and they're not running into the rest of the copy, or look, I'm not being tricked into looking at them because they look like this other thing that I care about. It's visually distinctive, so I get more or less priority depending on the value that it has to me. So that's one aspect of multiple typeface design that I think that people ignore, and I wish that would think about a little bit more. And so to wrap up, and I'll try to go fast because I feel like I'm taking a long time.
No, you're good. You're good. We're enjoying this.
Good, I'm glad. I'll talk about the Eephus League because, again, this is my presentation. I get to talk about my stuff. Isn't that great? So the Eephus League is a great sort of case study and example of how a brand evolves when it uses an insane number of typefaces. The Eephus League was a student project, so this was what I ended up with along with the website. When I graduated in 2010, I'd made all these different things, and through the wonders of Kickstarter and some very nice baseball fans, I was able to actually get these scorebooks produced and make a real thing. This is just an example of a book spread, and you can see some of the different typefaces that I was using. Hercules is a Scotch serif. I used some weights of Knockout, used some Brothers because I think it's a baseball font. And just over the years, I've done new things. I did this big long form Parallax Scrolling magazine experience for the Eephus League. That's why Parallax Scrolling articles were a big deal for a while. Believe it or not, this was one of the first ones that did it, and then everybody copied it, which is funny at the same time. But you can see there's some new typefaces in here. There's Herald Gothic and some mixing in some new things. So I've just made it a habit of trying to incorporate new typefaces that I find that I like, so long as they still fit within the sort of historic baseball feel of this league as I go. These are some more examples of screens from that scrolling experience. So you can see some more of the typography, more different typefaces. And then I've made, because I've done a second Kickstarter campaign, it was an excuse to make more physical objects like this gold fronted foil poster, which uses a lot of different typefaces. I don't know how many are on this, but it's a lot. And so sort of grown and evolved. I made business cards for the Eephus League, and I think there's 5 or 6 typefaces on this, which is a lot of typefaces per square inch. It's sort of become part of the brand identity. As I've gone, I add more. Some typefaces get retired and they get replaced with other things. Sometimes I like some typefaces more than others, but I feel like it all still feels like it's within the spirit of the brand. So this is just a sampling of some of the different typefaces that I've used over the years in my Eephus League work. And so it's sort of like part of the visual identity of the brand, but there was one problem, is that the website, which I built when I was a student in the summer of 2010, hadn't been updated in a long time. And there were not a lot of web typefaces available when I made it. I was a student, I couldn't have afforded them anyway. And so it needed to be, it wasn't responsive. It really needed an overhaul. It did not match the aesthetic of the rest of the physical materials at all. So starting last year, I started doing sketches, or 2 years ago, actually. Oh my God, it's 2017. So I started doing some sketches and trying out what would it look like now if it was a little bit more in line. And so I started with this, and it still didn't feel quite right. I was having a hard time deciding which typefaces I should use, in which ways. You know, I was sort of paralyzed by choice in some places, and also sure what the aesthetic of this website should be. So I stepped away from the sort of product pages and went back to this sort of Tumblr style, you know, post that the homepage of the site used to have. So I would make these posts about different statistics and different weird things like baseball nicknames and other things. Sorry, cursor. And all the little things about baseball that I love. Like, I love that basically every player who's ever played baseball has some weird nickname, and it's also written down by somebody, like how they got it. And so I had all these different types of information that I would, you know, display in these tiles, and they have different levels of hierarchy within them. So I was like, okay, this is my sort of informational hierarchy, like test, like what we were talking about before, where I already have these chunks of information and they have different levels of order within them. So I should start there in terms of trying to figure out what my type system for the site's going to be. So the different types of data that I had to play with were statistics, nicknames, quotes, jargon, so like weird baseball terminology, and equipment patents, and just images. So I had all these different types of posts that I wanted to have in this feed, and I wanted them all to feel unique, because like a statistic has a different vibe than like a nickname or a quote. They're different types of information. So I had to start playing with some of these modules and figuring out, you know, where did I want to be consistent? How consistent did I want to be? Did I want them all to feel completely different, or did there need to be some consistency? So I decided to start with nicknames first because they're great. And, you know, I started with Albert Orth's nickname, which is the Curveless Wonder. And so he played in a time where it was really weird to be good at baseball if you didn't throw a curveball, and he did it. So he was called the Curveless Wonder because creativity. So I took this information, broke it down, and started doing these sketches using some of the typefaces that I had used with the Eephus League, and some typefaces that I hadn't used but I wanted to. And some of these, like, I didn't hate, but none of them felt quite right for nicknames, given the sort of personality and playfulness that those pieces of information had. And so I remembered that there was a typeface that I have on, that I've had in the baseball or in the Eephus League sort of family of typefaces for a while, but I tried to deploy it limitedly because it can be overused, and that's Brothers. So this is the beer typeface, or this is in a lot of cases the baseball typeface. It tends to get picked up by a genre, and it can very easily overwhelm the aesthetic of it. But I started thinking about it, and I got really excited because I was like, wow, if I'm giving myself permission to use as many typefaces on this site as I want, then I can use Brothers, and I don't have to use it everywhere. And it's just going to become a part of the typographic texture of the site instead of the only thing that you see. So it also has like that really fun, personable like quality to it. It really matched the vibe that I wanted for nicknames. So I decided on this lockup with everything, picked Founders Grotesque as the body copy, and decided that I was going to make that unique across all of my tiles, paired some other typefaces, and then just finished out like some of the finishing touches in terms of how I wanted this tile to be styled. So once I figured that out, the others came more easily because I sort of had a logic for how I wanted to do that. I knew to do each tile, I knew that I wanted to have like the same common like margins for the rules around the content, I knew that I wanted the body copy to be consistent if on each one, and then I could let the headlines and the subheadings be unique for each tile type. So I was really happy with how it came out. The statistics are very, clinical, black and white, scientific, because they're math. They look like math. The pull quotes look like pull quotes. And I really love the patent tile as well, because it's using Hercules, that Scotch serif, which you'll see on a lot of old patent documents. So I was able to come up, by starting to set up the system, I was able to use all these different typefaces, but they are still within a system, and it allows me to have all these types of information that feel unique when they're in a stream, and they clearly identify what you're looking at because they're visually distinctive, but they're not distracting. It doesn't feel like too overwhelming, like, oh my gosh, there's just so many random typefaces, because there's a very clear logic to it. So after doing that, I went back to this page and I was like, screw you, we're gonna add some brothers and make this feel better. So like getting those tiles down allowed me to sort of fill out, like, okay, this is gonna be the section of typefaces that I'm gonna end up using. So I was able to flesh that out and give the whole site a closer personality to the actual physical object I'm making sell. And so these are the typefaces that I ended up using on the site. That is a lot of typefaces, one website, but I'm really proud of how it turned out. This is another example of an article page on the site and how it's deploying those same typefaces. So again, it always just comes back to, I think that you can use a lot of different typefaces together in the same design, a lot of different ways. You have a very clear understanding of why you're using each of those typefaces, and you're consistent about it. There's obviously opportunities to set up rules and then break them, and then you can play off of that surprise from people. But I think that you can get away with using a lot of typefaces a lot more easily than people make it seem, just so long you take the time to really get to know them and understand their strengths and weaknesses and study them. And so, again, just really happy to finally have a website that looks like the rest of my brand, and to get to do something that's maybe a little bit at the same time. And it finally launched last spring, and my sales have gone up. So more typefaces equals more money, guys. Like, do it. It's statistically proven. And the site's still responsive and everything else. So all that's good. It runs slow, but it's because I use big images. It's not because of the typefaces, sorry. And so bullet point, it's less about the fonts themselves and more about how you use them. I could give you any two great typefaces, and I promise you I could find ways to use them together badly. Same with bad typefaces. There's probably a good use. You could probably find the right use for a lot of different typefaces that might seem sloppy on the surface. If you're wanting to use typefaces that seem really similar, focus on their differences and emphasize those so you can use them to design. Start with a relationship between a pair of typefaces and add from there as you're building out a system. If you don't have a good core, if you're just picking typefaces at random, if you just pick two that are different because of different, you're not going to be able to build out a system. And then those two typefaces probably aren't going to flow great together either. You need to understand, you need to find little things between the typefaces that make them feel like they belong together. You should set your rules about your typeface usage and stick to them. The more typefaces you have in the design means it's like you have more kids running around in the house. It's great and fun, but it's more responsibility. So you have to be mindful. The contrast in type pairings is overrated. Anybody can pick typefaces that look different and put them together. The real comes from your content and hierarchy. You can make two typefaces that are similar to glance feel very different if you use them in a thoughtful way and understand the unique things about them. Like, it could be as simple as this typeface has a great Q in it, and so I'm going to make sure that I set this real big right here in a place where that Q is really going to jump out, and that'll be the thing that they notice. They won't notice that you're using another, serif typeface that's sort of similar down below. if you don't have diverse structures within your content that would allow you to add more typefaces or be a little bit more creative typographically, and even if you want to use the same typeface, you should still be looking at building out those diverse structures within your content. I think we often talk about typefaces and mixing typefaces like it's the end all of the problem, and I think a lot of it is just that a lot of designs that look like they're very repetitive and feel like, oh, you're just, you know, sticking a different typeface and all these, because somebody didn't do enough work to build out, you know, these sort of side pods and, you know, these introductory bits of information to help somebody understand what they're looking at. You can use different faces to distinguish distinctive elements in your content. So don't always feel like you got to put a box on it to make it feel different or make it stand out. Like sometimes a typeface can do that where you, and you should use distinctive faces sparingly with clear intention, because the more display faces you use in a design, they can start to overwhelm your aesthetic, and that becomes the thing that jumps out. So if you're going to use something like, say, Brothers, you need to be really selective about where you use it and make sure that if you do not want it to be the only thing that people notice, that you're balancing your usage of that both in scale and, you know, number of times that somebody sees it in a design. That's it.
Great. Thank you. Very nice. I'm just going to clap here since you can't hear everyone else, though. Very good. Love it. Love it. Thank you. Yes, Rosie says she's clapping. So I'm going to close your screen so you can see what everyone's saying. Oh my gosh. Very good. Yes, we love that. You and I were talking about when we first started, Bethany, that the rule of 2 or 3 typefaces comes from what I think is really for beginners. And, you know, it's sort of just a guideline for people to use going forward in terms of how to approach pairing typefaces, right? Or how to approach doing their design. But the lessons that you provided are really for advanced users. You really need to know your typefaces very well. Like you mentioned, the specifics, the details of the spacing, the details of the curvatures of, you know, the different anatomy of the type, and also how to use it. It's not just using many different typefaces, but also how to use it. So it takes some skill involved, but, you know, with practice, that's how you're able to create such rich palettes like you have. Beautiful. Beautiful work.
Thank you.
Well, I'm not going to ask questions because we have a lot of questions, if that's okay, unless you have anything else that you want to cap.
No, I'm happy to field questions.
Excellent. Great. So guys, we're going to answer some questions. If you have questions, please put them underneath. I realize we're going a little bit over, but I hope you understand how enjoyable that was. I just couldn't stop you at all.
Sorry.
No, don't worry. So our very first question comes from James, which was for some reason voted up 5 times. James wants to know, who's your favorite Spice Girl? Thank you, James, for asking that.
I'm going to say Scary Spice because I don't know the Spice Girls. I'm sorry, James.
Okay.
Ask me who my favorite, like, NSYNC or, you know, Backstreet Boy is. It's Kevin is my favorite Backstreet Boy.
Great. I love that. Thank you, James, for asking that question. Okay, so Matt is asking, can you talk about your general process when getting a project and how you then think about and choose appropriate fonts? Do you have a favorite combinations that seem to work for almost anything thrown at you?
There are certain typefaces that I have that I consider reliable, and a lot of them are made by Klim is my favorite foundry. So I have things like Galaxy Copernicus and Colibri and Founders Grotesque. Those are the types of things that I often find myself going to first, depending on the mood of the project. And so I'll either start with sort of a crutch typeface like that I know what it's going to do, and then I might try to experiment off of that. So I start with something safe, and then if there's a new typeface that I want an excuse to try, I might use that, say, okay, well, I know that I've got this that works, and so let's see how it pairs with these other things, and then sort of explore from there. So if you want to be like conservative and cautious about it, that's one way to start. And picking a favorite foundry always helps too. If there's a type designer that you really like their work and you're familiar with how they're constructing their typefaces, that'll help you. So like Clem's, a lot of just even like the proportions of the typefaces are similar. So you can like swap them in and out and it's not going to break anything because it's the same person making them who has the same sort of methodology to how he's creating type. So things like that help. And I see a lot of times when I get a new project, I use it as an excuse to buy typefaces that I've been wanting to try that I haven't bought yet. So new projects are great because they're excuses to buy more typefaces.
I think that's a great approach to your process. You want to use a tool that you're very familiar with, and then if you have to differentiate or you have to change from there, that's at least a good starting space. Okay, Matt, I hope that helps. Let's see. So Luke is asking, do you have a favorite type specimen book?
Ooh, I don't know if there's one that I can name. I have some types. My favorite book of type specimens is American Wood Type, which is a book that everybody should own. I should get it actually and show it to you. But it's a book about it's a Robert Kelly book that was written a long time ago about the history of the evolution of wood type in the U.S. specifically, because it turns out the U.S. was way better at developing wood typefaces than the U.K. was. Sorry, Brits, but we were better at it.
Do you want to grab the book? We'd love to see it.
Yeah.
Okay. See, Darren saying it's Colibri, or it's pronounced in English Calibri.
So if you get a copy new, it looks like this. This is the new soft cover that's actually affordable and findable. If you're lucky, you'll get one like this. That's the hardcover. It's the same book. It's just hardcover. So it's full of, great examples like this of, a lot of this stuff in wood type was developed by people who were not typographers. They were just guys in workshops who knew how to cut the wood, and somebody would say, I want a typeface that looks like this typeface, but I want it to have hours on it. And so the person would have to go in and design it and make it with the pantograph. And so that's why you have so many weird display combinations and weird ideas like reverse stress, Italian typefaces and things like that. A lot of that came from, just dudes making type in, poster shops in early America. So I think that you will learn, you'll learn more about typography through that book than just about any other textbook that you would find about typography fundamentals, at least in terms of the things that, the things beyond the basics of, how you should set type and, hang your punctuation and things like that. If you want something about the actual development of styles of letter forms, it's invaluable. And it's thankfully now that they've re-released it in that soft cover, you can actually find it, which is great.
Great. Nice. Thank you. Yeah, we'll have to check it out. Okay. Ravi is asking, do you feel that if you use 3 or more typefaces in a design, it becomes more of a type experiment in that it's fun, but the focal point might get lost, and that it's less of a finished piece? How do you find a nice balance?
I think it depends on if the content justifies it. So that example, like typography for lawyers, I feel like justifies all the different typefaces that they're using because they're using it as he's got like 8 different types of content that he's trying to present. So he's using 8 different typefaces and none of them are so distinctive that they're distracting. Again, it's not, none of them are particularly high contrast. So even if he was using something like, say, a Bethany, which is a very high contrast typeface, that would probably start to hinder the legibility of the project. It would draw more attention to itself just because of the sort of thick, thin, like artistic vibe of the letter forms. But all of those typefaces are perfectly reasonable. So in that case, and in others that I feel like I showed in the presentation, I feel like they can aid legibility. I've actually gone through and done some, like reset some of those spreads from Butterick's book in the same typeface. And I would love to like argue with somebody who thinks that the single typeface is easier to digest, because I think that adding the typographic layers makes it much easier for me to distinguish there are different types of information here that mean different things.
Yeah, I would guess that if you do 3 or more typefaces in design, if you want it to look like an experimental or fun piece, you can. But if you're using it as tools to actually like put some meaning towards the type of content, like you're saying, then it works that way. Because in Matthew Butterick's book, it doesn't look like a crazy fun poster or anything. I mean, you read it and it's a singular reading experience.
And it is rare to have that amount of variety in your content and the work that you're doing. So realistically, how many projects you know have that many layers of information or different types of information that they want to show? It's not many. But I do think the reason that I push people to like do more than just pick headings, subheadings, and paragraph text is because I think that that's the job of the designer, is to comprehend that and pull things out and highlight them and showcase them in a way. And if you want to do it by using a different typeface to do it, then that's one way. Or you can use the same typeface and differentiate it in another way. I just like using typefaces.
Right. We always teach to read everything before you set it. I mean, you wouldn't know even how to approach using different typefaces if you didn't read the thing. So great. I hope that helped, Robbie. Bernardo's asking, how do you feel about superfamilies? Would you still pair them with other type families or turn them into workhorses? Good question.
It depends on the superfamily. So a superfamily like Knockout is really diverse. Druck is another one that's super, like each different weight sort of feels like it belongs in the same family, but it also feels really visually distinctive. So if you're, it depends. Interstate's also, I guess, technically a superfamily. But I don't consider each weight of Interstate that I use as being a different typeface. I consider it like sort of an extension of something. So when I say that I'm using like 8 typefaces on the Eephus League, I'm not counting the multiple weights of Interstate that I'm using. I don't have a problem with, I think superfamilies are cool and great, but I still don't feel like they usually provide the level of visual distinction that I'm looking for in a design. So I appreciate that, okay, I can really pinpoint like the exact weight and width of something that I want when I'm using it in isolation, but I don't know if I've ever done a project where I was like, oh, this is great because I have a superfamily and I can use it for all my needs. That's just not my visual aesthetic, but I think some people do great work with that.
I think so too. I think it's, having a serif and a sans, that's sort of like your go-to. I think it's a good workhorse, but I don't think it fits with your aesthetic at all. Okay, Bernardo. All right, so Matt is asking, what made you fall in love with type/design?
I think a lot of it with type was collecting wood type. I should get up. I'm gonna have to get up again.
Good. Bernardo, I agree with you. We love superfamilies also, but yes, I mean, looking at her rich palettes, definitely I want to play with more typefaces too. Sorry, I'm replying to Bernardo. Go ahead.
I started collecting wood type about the time that I was in college. And so I think that was what got me started with loving letter forms. I also collected a lot of really awful free typefaces before, like back when I was in high school and I was teaching myself Photoshop to do terrible things with the things that I was playing with. I'm a collector at heart, so collecting things like wood type and then collecting, digital typefaces, starting off like with really bad stuff from DeFonts and eventually going to school and learning about better typefaces and then wanting to click to those too. So there's that aspect of it. And then with typography, like I said, I can't illustrate. I can barely write my name. And I'm not a photographer, and I don't usually think in an image-based way either. When I get a problem, I don't really have ideas for stuff often in terms of like, I can picture this thing that I want to make. I usually have to start setting type or writing words and playing with things and letting it grow and evolve from there. So type works best for me in that way. And I do enjoy writing. So typography is really the only tool I have in my bucket in a lot of cases. And just in design in general, my dad's a graphic design professor, but to be honest, he didn't talk a lot about what he, like, I was not a curious kid. I didn't ask him a lot about, like, Dad, what's it mean to be a designer? But it did give me access to Photoshop. So when I started watching anime in junior high, I started cutting up, you know, the pictures and putting type on them and doing awful Photoshop filters and stuff, and sort of backed my way into design that way.
Very zany. Okay, cool. Thanks, Matt. So guys, we're gonna, we have about 4 questions left. Let's just take these 4 questions and then we'll finish up. We don't want to take up your whole day, Bethany. So Mindy is asking, as a beginning freelance designer, how can I get the best looking typefaces on a budget?
That's a good question. So certain foundries are definitely a better budget than others. Smaller foundries tend to be cheaper. There are sites like FontStan that let you rent fonts. So if there's a few ways of doing it. So you can look for those smaller foundries that have, you know, typefaces that you like that aren't going to break your budget. You can use tools like FontStan to rent stuff and try it, and then only buy the weights that you need, and just kind of maybe eventually build up to the full family if you really love that. A lot of times, if you're still a student, a lot of foundries actually will give a discount to students for their typefaces, which is, somebody made a list and I can send it to you, so you could distribute it to the group maybe. And I'm actually, it's funny that you mentioned this, because I am trying to work out some sort of typographic scholarship to give for recent grads, and I don't know like what the stipulations are going to be, but I want to start giving like a certain amount every year to buying a package of typefaces that I can then give to another designer who's just starting out, so they have some sort of small library of typefaces to start out with.
Great.
And I'm hoping that if I do that and it's well received, that other designers will start doing the same, and we can get more people doing it every year. And there are some foundries who are interested in that, and maybe, you know, taking a little bit off so I can have more typefaces in whatever this bundle is. So I'm still working out the logistics, but I recognize that that's a problem, and I hate to see people not have access to the typefaces that they want because of money, because I know that you often feel like, oh, am I being cheap, or do I not, like, there's sort of this perception that if you're struggling to buy typefaces that it's because you're being cheap, or, you know, you don't think that it's worth it, when that's usually not the case. It's that type is inaccessible for a lot of people because of the cost. So I'm trying to think of ways of alleviating that.
That's great. And I love FontStan because they work with a lot of independent foundries. So you have more varied different typefaces. But what are your thoughts about working with Typekit and the Monotype library subscription, the subscription types services?
I'm I'm kind of paranoid when it comes to that stuff, and I want to own things. I don't ever like the idea of having it taken away. So I do a lot of work for Monotype, so I should say the Monotype subscription is great. It did fantacular work with the typefaces that are in it, and there's some great typefaces in it, and there are great typefaces on Typekit. So they're valuable services. I just I don't feel great about this idea that, like, there's all these things that you used to be at, like even Creative Cloud. Like, I preferred the old model where you bought your license once and you used it for 4 or 5 years, and if you needed to upgrade, you upgraded. And I don't really like this sort of idea that you buy in and you're stuck to have access to something. So it's within my personality to want to buy the typeface and it's mine. But I know that that's not how everybody feels, and I think that if you want to have access, if you don't want to do the digging into looking to all these different foundries, like, those types of subscriptions are great because they give you sort of this very wide spread of different typefaces all at a glance.
Right.
You're not having to go out and buy all these different families,
Right.
which is good.
And you can also do what you mentioned and use the Monotype library subscription and Typekit to find something and then purchase afterwards. So
Yes.
yeah, maybe not at a discount, but you'll have to check if they have a student discounts. I hope that helps, Mindy. So Rosie is asking, any chance you teach an advanced typography class in Seattle somewhere? A class to help students to get to or make progress towards what you said the IL magazine and Nadav examples do.
I have always been interested in teaching, and that was something that I wanted to do out of school, and my career has just taken me in a different path. But I'm certainly interested in it. It's the logistics of figuring it out that are tough. I'm sure I could probably bug some universities and get somebody to lend me a classroom so I could teach a class, once a semester or something. But I am working on trying to put together a book that's, sort of an expanded version of this talk that has in-depth case studies about certain designs, talking about the typefaces, identifying the typefaces that they're using, talking about why those typefaces are effective, mocking up examples of here's why this would feel very different if it was using a different typeface. So I think that that's sort of a gap in the sort of type book market right now. A lot of our type like staple books don't talk about type combinations at all. So that's something that I'm hoping to do so long as I can make time.
And if we will be holding out for this book, where do we go to find out?
If it happens, I'll tweet about it and I'll write about it on my website, and I'll probably post about it on Dribble.
Okay.
But I'll probably kickstart it. I've thought a lot about going through a publisher, which I think I could do, but the more I find out about that, the more it sounds less appealing. So I think I'd rather self-publish.
And if you're interested in teaching, I'd be happy to help. We hosted a workshop for John Downer a couple of weeks ago, and so let me know, and I'll be happy to help out.
Yeah, you've got all the connections and the hookups.
Okay, Rosie, I hope we can get up there and teach a class. Marina is asking, can a type license be resold? Actually, I don't think so.
I don't think so.
No,
I don't think so. So if I was going to do something like that typographic scholarship, it would have to be that I would have to know who it was going to be for and then purchase those in that person's name, which I've done as gifts for friends before, which you would actually be surprised at how many type sites like totally freak out when you try to do that. Mm-hmm. I went to Commercial Type and I bought a license of a typeface, and then I tried to go back in and buy it again for a license for a coworker who really wanted the typeface. And it was like I had to log in on a different browser because it was like, you've already bought this, like you don't need to pay for it. And I was like, no, it's for a different license for a different person. So some sites have a hard time with that, but yeah, that's usually, you have to get it in the name of the person who it's going to go to. You can't get it and then sell it to somebody else.
Right. I've been asking some of the foundries and type designers if they'll just offer gift certificates, some way to purchase so they can just get their license.
It's interesting. The type designer community often I found has a weird disconnect with actual graphic designers, which is odd because graphic designers are they're their only client. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I'm hoping that we can figure. I think that there are enough good foundries who even if somebody's not willing to offer a discount, I have enough set aside for this that I think that I can get a few good families for people. And yeah, I want to start with one and go from there.
Okay. All right, we have two more. So Cordelia asks, this is very helpful. I often work with nonprofits and organizations who are doing good work on a limited budget. What do you recommend when you don't have an unlimited budget for font purchases?
In the same way as a lot of foundries do things for students, a lot of foundries will actually they'll cut deals for nonprofits if you say that you want to use their work. I'll share that list that I have with you, and oh my gosh, I'm forgetting his name. I think David Jonathan Ross is one that does. He'll cut deals with nonprofits and some other folks. So there, yay, Caesar. So there are great type designers who understand the situation that nonprofits are in and will lend a hand.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, David, for helping us out.
I'm sorry that I blanked on your name first.
That's okay. So Cordelia, I hope that helps. We will get a list out to you guys. We'll follow up with some places to be able to get student discounts and or nonprofits. So Justin's asking the last question. What are your considerations for downloading sizes when you're using a number of different web fonts? This is a good question. How do you balance page weight with type and type flare?
It depends on, it obviously depends on the type of site that you're using and what your, where your load is. So obviously something like the Eephus League, which is using an insane number of fonts, is a lot of load. But it's also, I don't do a good job of compressing the images on that site. So that sort of makes the typeface thing silly because my images are gigantic because I'm sorry, that's not something I prioritized in that design, and I'll get to fixing it eventually. It's not optimized. But there are things you can do about limiting character sets if you have a good feel about how you're going to be using a typeface. If you're only going to be using the number set, you can do. There's a lot of things that you can do to limit the actual characters of a typeface that you bring in that will drastically reduce the font size. And a lot of typefaces are relatively small in the grand scheme of things, and usually a site only needs to load the typefaces once, so it's on the initial visit to the site. So it depends, but you know, for some people, like that initial load is everything, and if you lose, if like you take too long, then you lose them. So it's obviously not right for everything. But there are like Google Lamp has some great recommendations on how you can with that effort, which is it's accelerated mobile pages. They have some really great guidelines on how you can go in and sort of monitor the weights of your typefaces and what characters you bring in, and have a lot of advice on how you can trim those.
Did you say
and make the Google AMP accelerated mobile pages? It's an open source initiative they have. That it's when you look at a search result on your phone, it's got the little lightning bolt next to it. That's an AMP page. So they put like limits on like how big your type files can be and things like that, and they have a lot of advice to help developers figure out how to reduce like burden on lots of different things, including typefaces.
It's great. Okay, hope that helps, Justin. Well, thank you guys for helping out. I see that everyone in the chat bar, and I know that we haven't really been monitoring it too much, but thank you so much for throwing in some links. We will also, or I will send a follow-up. I will connect with Bethany and we'll get a follow-up of some of the resources that she gave us. I do have one question. Your favorite foundry in terms of typefaces is Klim, right?
Yes.
Do you have a second favorite?
Ooh, I really like Commercial too. They've been doing some great stuff. I got Stymie that they released, Styrene, which I really like. It's like a weird sort of, looks like a monospace typeface, but it's not. It's really interesting.
Cool. Check it out. Very cool. Well, thank you guys for joining us. Sorry we went over about 25 minutes, but I hope it was very informative. Yes, great. Glad. And also, when you get a chance, I know because you're speaking, Bethany, take a look at the chat bar during the replay. The replay will be up in about 2 seconds after we stop, so you'll be able to take a look. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. I will invite you all to the Facebook group. Hopefully, we can continue the conversation there. If you have any questions for Bethany, check out her Twitter, which is Eephus League. Is that correct?
Yes.
So Eephus League, and she will respond to you there, or also her website, the Heck House, which there's a button right underneath, if you're wondering. Well, have a good day.
Sorry going long. Thank you so much for having me.
It was great. Thank you so much, Bethany, and you have a good day. Thanks, everyone.
You too.
Have a good day. Okay, bye-bye.